So, climate change or global warming, both phrases that have become incredibly contentious and politicised in recent years.
How dare you?
There are endless arguments on this subject that remain somewhat unresolved. No matter what side of the fence you sit on, you should expect a barrage of information to the contrary that leads you down a rabbit hole, looking for legitimacy and flaws at every turn. The primary dispute questions the significance that the effect of human-produced greenhouse gases like methane and CO2 have on global temperatures, or even whether recent changes in climate could be chalked up to natural geological or astrological cycles relating to such things as the intensity of the sun or the precession of the Earth's axial tilt. Well, luckily for me, in this video, I don't really need to take a side. I can take a seat firmly on the fence and leave those issues unresolved. I will say, however, that the true picture is likely to be a combination of arguments from both sides, and the most adequate response is probably best found somewhere between alarmism and complacency. There doesn't seem to be much balance these days. Now, the currently held consensus is that human-produced greenhouse gases such as CO2 are having an insulating effect on the planet. This is because compound gases made up of more than one element, have bonds that absorb and re-emit infrared photons back into the atmosphere, rather than letting them fly off into space. In fact, the most abundant greenhouse gas, water, is far more effective at doing this when compared with CO2. This is why nights with a clear sky are far colder than those with cloud cover. So yes, the greenhouse effect is definitely a thing. But just how influential is it on the temperature of the globe? It's difficult to say. Anyway, irrespective of what I think, governments around the world have decided the best way to modulate the temperature of the planet is by reducing CO2. And maybe they're right. But, and this is a big but, is it really worth it? Now, I'm not saying that we sit here and do nothing as the climate becomes uninhabitable. Quite to the contrary. I think that we should be proactive. I do believe that we can do a much better job at controlling the climate. In fact, I think in the face of long-term climate change, lurching from one ice age to the next at the whim of solar and Milankovitch cycles, we should take charge of our dynamic climate, stabilising it far into the future, maybe even making Earth more habitable than it currently is. This can't really be done by artificially altering Earth's atmospheric constituents. Yes, removing CO2 might stabilise the Earth's temperature temporarily. But in the case of a solar minimum, or a precession of the Earth's tilt that makes things a little chillier, are we going to add more CO2 to warm things up? I don't think so. What we need is a way to modulate the incident energy that is provided to Earth on any one day. An external control mechanism that could smooth out any aberrations caused by astronomical effects. If we could come up with something that would elicit this level of control, it would mean that developing nations could have the same advantages that the first world nations had throughout the industrialisation of the West. Burning fossil fuels for cheap, reliable energy, at least until they have infrastructures and high enough GDPs to branch out into more sustainable energy production. Besides, if we can mitigate the CO2's greenhouse effect, the extra CO2 would be a good thing. Ask any gardener and they'll tell you that CO2 acts like a fertiliser, increasing plant growth, and personally, I've never heard anyone say that a greener planet is a bad thing. So, if we could control the climate long term, we could slowly wean ourselves off the burning of archaic organisms as fuel, slowly and gradually with minimal economic fallout. But how could it be done? Changing our behaviour is the only viable way to do it, right? Well, you might have recently watched a video on this channel that looked at the subject of terraforming Venus, making the hellscape habitable for human occupation. There should be a link to that video appearing around here somewhere. Well, whilst researching the subject, it occurred to me that if it's theoretically possible for humanity to cool Venus from an infernal 730 degrees Kelvin to 304 degrees Kelvin in just a few decades using nothing more than a well-placed mirror, albeit a colossal one, surely shaving a degree or two off global temperatures here with a similar strategy would be a doddle, in relative terms. And based on the costings for the potential Venus project, it could work out to be a damn sight cheaper than forcing everyone to give up flying and convert to renewable energy. So, what would it look like? And what would be the costs, risks and benefits of such an effort? Well, I'm no expert in optics, space missions, climate science, granted. But using some sensible reference points and a bit of common sense and a whole lot of speculation, I think I can flesh out a basic concept and give you some back of a napkin calculations to boot. So, if we take the initial concept from the paper Terraforming Venus quickly, a thin mirror around 27 times the area of the US, 2.5 times 10 to the 14 metres squared, or 250 million kilometres squared, that could be placed at the Lagrangian point between the planet and our star. This would block out all of the sunlight. Obviously, we wouldn't need anything like that scale to cool down Earth, but as Venus is pretty much the same size as Earth, we can use these numbers as a jump off point. So let's say we aim for a mirror 1% the size of that required to cool down Venus. Now don't get me wrong, the mirror might need to block out 2% or maybe only 0.1%. Either way, my guesstimation of 1% is likely to be within an order of magnitude of what would be required, so it'll do for this YouTube video, I should think. Now, a mirror that is 1% the size of the one that would be required to cool Venus is only around 2.5 million kilometres squared. I say only. For reference, that's still around the area of Algeria, or around 10 United Kingdoms. So I'm not going to minimise it, it's a very big mirror. Obviously, a mirror of this size would not block the entire sun, only a small portion of it. And this would likely appear as a small partial eclipse that casts a shadow over one part of the Earth as the day proceeds. A temporary night time across a single line of the Earth for a few minutes each day. Although this sounds like a small change, over time this would impact global temperatures. I would propose that the target for the shaded region be located on or near the equator in order to have the maximum cooling effect and the minimal impact on population centres. Although, seeing a daily man-made eclipse might end up becoming something of a tourist attraction over time. I'd visit it. Obviously, blocking the sun out to one specific region indefinitely is a bit of a blunt tool, but it wouldn't have to be. For instance, the mirrors could be designed in sections, where should more sunlight be required, each mirror could be rotated to be perpendicular to the sun's rays, allowing complete control of the amount of sunlight that is obscured. What's more, the mirrors are simply blocking solar radiation. They could just as easily be constructed from solar cell material, collecting the energy that we're blocking and beaming it to Earth or to other space-based projects via lasers. Being in space with no atmospheric interference and having such a large surface area and being so much closer to the sun would produce a colossal amount of energy. Maybe we could eradicate the need for fossil fuels. Obviously, constructing it from solar cells would massively increase the cost. But I'm sure the aerospace boffins could run the numbers and do a cost-benefit analysis. So, an ambitious plan that could mitigate the effects of climate change and give us fine control over the climate over a longer timescale, negating the economic impacts of net zero policies, sounds good to me. But of course, it's only worth it if the numbers add up. So, using the 1991 Venus paper as a reference and adjusting for inflation, a simple aluminised film mirror that could block the sun from the entire planet will cost around £1 trillion. Now, our mirror would need to be about 99% smaller than that, but much more technologically sophisticated. So, I'm going to be really conservative and give it a cost of anywhere from 1 to 20 trillion, just as a ballpark figure, depending on how ambitious we are with it. Now, it'll take a lot of material, and maybe even kick off new industries like asteroid mining to reduce the manufacturing costs. Yes, this is a staggering bill, but please be aware I am adding an order of magnitude to the price just for contingency. The cost could be far less. I mean, look at the James Webb Space Telescope, for example. That project only cost $10 billion and was a technical triumph, far more complex than deploying a simple sunshade. Nevertheless, these figures pale into insignificance when you look at the amount of money that governments are preparing to spend just to reach net zero. Even 20 trillion is literally a drop in the ocean, especially when you consider that the sunshade plan would theoretically not just pause the temperature increase, but potentially reverse it. I mean, even if we managed to reach zero carbon emissions, it would only take a couple of large volcanic eruptions and atmospheric CO2 would shoot through the roof, with no mechanism to prevent or counteract it. So, how much are governments planning to spend to reach the holy net zero? Well, it varies massively from source to source, but based on the information I could scrape off Google, the requirements for global spending are estimated to be 2.7 to 9.2 trillion USD annually from now until 2050. And that's just to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, not reversing it at all. That's anywhere from 70.2 to $239.2 trillion. And that wouldn't even return us to baseline temperature. And we would need to control this gas indefinitely. Now, with solar control mirrors, these efforts would not even be necessary, and based on my estimates, implementing a solar shade plan would be considerably cheaper, and maybe, due to the complex technical requirements of space travel, even drive economic growth. Developments in space tech do tend to do that. Now, in the long term, on the scale of thousands of years, it's almost certain that we would need to take control of our climate. The Earth has gone through cycles of hot and cold for billions of years, and it's not going to stop now just because we're here. Now, by using combinations of mirrors and shades positioned at the various Lagrange points, we could reflect extra sunlight towards Earth to prevent ice ages and shade the Earth to prevent overheating. Technologies such as these would not simply be a luxury, but a necessity, helping to maintain a stable environment in which we evolved. And besides, it would mean we would take a step towards that illustrious level 1 on a Kardashev scale. So, that's the good points. But what about the drawbacks? One major issue that we would need to overcome results from the bipartisan world that we live in today. Most countries simply don't get along, and a project of this enormity would be best completed as a team effort. Now, this is not just because of the technical prowess from many different nations could align to make the project run more smoothly or effectively. That'd be nice. But that's not the issue. A country with an economy the size of the US could easily do this alone. But a technology that can block out the sun to specific points on Earth or focus the sun rays on a specific nation is highly likely to be co-opted for weaponization. Which is why most countries would want to have a hand in the project to prevent foul play. I mean, the structure would be millions of miles away and the size of a large country. Not an easy target to take down should it be used maliciously. Okay. So this is obviously a completely hypothetical thought experiment, and I've got very little idea about the potential limitations, but if this geoengineering project can be completed for less than the 70 to 240 trillion that we're set to spend just to maintain the current temperature, I think it should be at least considered. Let's not just put a plaster on the sore, let's heal it over, and if we can, strengthen it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you'll probably like this one, and if you can hit the like button and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. See you in the next one.